Our scripture reading this morning is in some ways a pretty famous one. It comes from the book of John. It is where Jesus introduces one of his great and most famous metaphors of the Good Shepherd. And he is, of course, the Good Shepherd. The one person, if you've ever noticed, in all of our stained glass, the only image of God or the only image of Jesus we have is in this shepherd window here. It has become one of the most enduring and beloved ways of thinking about who God and Jesus is to us. And here is some, at least, of what Jesus says about shepherds. Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me, are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. May God add understanding to the hearing of these words. And will you pray with me, please? Holy and gracious God, be within us and among us as we turn our hearts and our minds to you. Amen. I recently saw a quick experiment, and I want to try to recreate it in a small way here for a moment. Isn't it fun to be experimented on? I like to think of it as being experimented with, if that helps. I don't know if that helps. Anyway, if you look at the back of your bulletin insert, that insert in your bulletin, at the bottom of that, you'll see at the bottom two circles. One is blue and the other is kind of this taupey gray color. I'm colorblind. That's what I told they were. You can correct me after the service. There's two circles at the bottom. Look at those circles for a moment, if you would. They look like they're about the same size, don't they? They do, don't they? And here's the thing. They're not the same size. There is something about how we see things that tricks us, right? Something about how we process color that makes them seem like they're the same size. But these two colors, this blue and this taupey gray, they're picked specifically because they play off one another to make them seem like the same size. But one of those circles is actually a little bit bigger, and that's the hard part. Can you tell which one? Yeah. I was going to say I wasn't going to ask of shout of hands, but we have some suggestions already. Choose for a moment, which one do you think is the biggest one? We got a lot of blue. I'm hearing a lot of blue. It's weird once you see it, though, right? Because they look kind of the same. Do you know why they look the same? Because they are. They're the same. I lied. I lied. I said I'm sorry, but it was for the point of making a point in the sermon. But they're the same. The colors are random. I copied and pasted one over to the other side. And yet it is so easy. I fell for this the first time I saw it. It is so easy for our minds to be changed. It's so easy, especially sometimes when someone, especially who is in a position of authority and trust, sorry about that, when they tell you you're wrong about something that you can clearly see, and then substitute their reality for your own. We are so willing sometimes to go against what our own intuition and our own instincts. When someone just says, yeah, but did you know you were wrong? It's actually this. How often do we let what we just know to be true be overwritten by somebody else's truth? If nothing else, that experiment shows how malleable we are sometimes, our reality is, how changeable our reality is if someone just tells us to see it differently, tells us we're wrong, not to trust ourselves. How shapeable and how impressionable we are, and then how tough it is to unlearn. So you go a little bit further into this and you think, if you spent your entire life being told that that blue circle is bigger, or only people in the blue circle are going to heaven, not to put too fine a point on it, that's how we will always see it. Enough people tell us to see that way, that's the only way to see it, it's over and over again, and we will die believing that the blue circle is bigger, even if it isn't. Even as there's a part of us, some God-given instinctive love in us screaming, that's not how it is. Aren't we all human beings? What kind of God would do this? So at its worst, this is used for mass conditioning, religious abuse, gaslighting, someone substituting their reality for your own, telling you're wrong, you can't trust yourself about anything, you can't trust your judgment, you can't believe yourself. But even on a smaller scale, day in, day out, this is disorienting, confusing, exhausting. No wonder we are confused. We have constant, countless voices, opinions, information, messages bombarding us all the time. It's chaos for a lot of us. This cacophony of voices, not only shouting at us, but competing for control over us, trying to tell us what real reality is, until we have no idea which voices to trust, which voices are just trying to use us, which voice is ours, let alone what could possibly be the voice of God. So the shepherd calls his own sheep by name and leads them out, Jesus says. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. And of course, Jesus would go on to say that he is that good shepherd, and those who know him follow his voice, and he leads them to safety and abundant life. And actually, what he's describing here feels pretty close to what we're living. In most towns of that time, the sheep of all the shepherds would be kept overnight in one big common enclosure. And when it was morning and time to lead them out to pasture, each shepherd would call only his own sheep out of this massive tangled herd. And with his own unique call that his sheep recognized, he would call them out. So imagine being a sheep. We always get to be the sheep in these metaphors. It's so flattering, isn't it? But imagine being one of these sheep in all the shouting and the bleeding chaos, trying to listen for that one good voice we recognize, the one to follow, the one that would keep us safe and lead us to what we needed. That feels to me a lot like what we're living. And even more so when you consider that some of those trying to get our attention, as Jesus says, are out to get us, use us, even take our life, take over our life. Thieves and bandits that come only to kill and steal and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly, Jesus says. So how do we pick out that one voice, or just those true voices, trying to break through the noise and lead us to abundant life? How do we pick them out of all the nonsense noise? There's a lot out there not to trust. You heard it here, folks. But there's a lot out there trying to get in and influence us, and that can be dangerous. But it can be dangerous in the opposite way, too. And that's if we get so scared about what's out there that we never listen to anything outside of ourselves. We so fully slip into mistrust that we only listen to ourselves, or what we think is ourselves. And there's some of that out there too. Never trust anyone, trust only yourself. This kind of paralyzing paranoia where we rely only on ourselves, which is a great way to get stuck, or at least a great way to keep getting what you're already getting. Another quick story for you. You might know that monarch butterflies migrate, right? As far north as Canada, and then down to Mexico. Often from the same exact area in Canada to the same couple square miles in Mexico. Year after year, they make that journey, thousands of miles. And if you think that sounds impossible for a butterfly, it is. You're right. I didn't know this up until a couple of years ago, but no one butterfly makes that migration. It takes, I think, about 4 generations of butterflies to make it to Mexico and 4 generations to make it back. So it might take a lineage of 8 monarchs. There's a joke in there somewhere, considering the coronation from last week. But it takes a lineage of 8 monarch butterflies to go from Canada to Mexico, back to Canada, and yet they still find their way. And every year, they take a left over Lake Superior. Every time when they pass over Lake Superior, they go around. They've tracked this migration, and they do this big thing over Lake Superior. Around what? Nothing. But they take this huge detour when they're over the lake. And why? And the best guess now, because this was recently discovered, is that there used to be a mountain there. Millions of years ago, there was a mountain there, right in the middle of what is now Lake Superior, right in the middle of their migration path. And countless generations of monarch butterflies learned to go around. And now they still go around, even though it's not there anymore and probably making their lives harder. And you probably see where I'm going with this, right? How conditioned are we by the past? How are our instincts about what is right and good and necessary, how we should be, how much of that is the past speaking? Maybe in ways that aren't helpful or not helpful anymore. It was helpful once, but it's not helpful anymore. How are we sometimes warped by old traumas, bad information? How often are our patterns set by things that aren't there anymore, except for the ways they live in us? Are we still monarchs flying around mountains that aren't there? If you've ever tried to just go it alone, trust your own head and nothing else, I think you know the limits of that. We are not always the best at leading ourselves to abundant life. In the immortal words of Dr. Phil, how's that working for you? So I'm wondering if this might all sound a little bit discouraging. Don't trust me. I lied to you earlier, right? Just to make a sermon point. And don't trust those voices out there. And sometimes you can't trust yourself either. So what do you do with that? There's a reason Jesus was speaking 2,000 years ago about how important it is to know who to listen to. It's a challenge for every life in every time. What voices do we follow? Or to put it the other way, what voices do we let lead us? What do we allow to have that kind of authority over us? Why? We are always being led by something. How intentional are we about what that is? About who that is? And what's challenging, too, is that this passage seems to say that a lot of the questions about how we get led actually have to do with us. This doesn't just happen if we don't listen. This has never been a question of whether God is calling us. It has always been a question of how well we can listen. So how well do we listen? How often do we get actually quiet enough to let things settle? Sometimes I think we say, I've been really praying about this. And we have. And that praying involves a lot of talking. And the spaces between the talking, we fill not with listening, but with worrying. Have we been listening for God, or have we been perpetually processing a million hypotheticals about what will probably never be? So let's listen and create real space. If you want to listen, create real, uncomfortable, just sitting with it and not trying to solve it ourselves space. Real, surrender everything you can't control, which is most of it, space. Real, let go of everything you wished would be so you can see what actually is, space. And listen. And when we do, what does the voice of the Good Shepherd sound like? For me, anyway, the question is often, what does the voice of God feel like? And the short answer is, which sounds like a cop-out, but I think it's good news, is that it feels like a lot of things. Sometimes it can feel like an accumulation, a lot of consistent, loving, trusted voices, all telling us the same thing. Sometimes God speaks through other people. There's a great line in a show where one character says, "Everybody I know keeps trying to change me." And the other one says, "I know. Take the hint." So who do you talk to get an outsider's view on you? Someone who can see you more clearly than you can. Sometimes the voice of God arrives like a punch in the gut or a slap over the back of the head, abrupt and obvious and painful and disruptive. Here is what is true and right, and next, like it or not, here you are. Sometimes it's like an epiphany, but more often than I would like to be true, the good news shows up feeling like bad news. Not what we want to hear, not what we would choose in the moment. Sometimes, if we're honest, we do get a clear direction, and it's just not where we want to go. And we don't find out how right it is unless we have the faith to live into it. And sometimes the voice is like an itch you can't scratch, a tug on your heart or a twinge in your gut that won't stop, a nagging sense that this isn't right, or there's something more, something that no matter how hard you try to ignore it, you can't shake it, for years maybe. Something you know is right, but it would be so messy or hard to change, we settle for what we think is good enough, until for one reason or another we can't anymore. The times in my life that I have made the best, hardest decisions, the times when I have been best led, have been when things seemed fine on the surface, but I was deeply unsettled. And then the best, hardest decision, the time when I was best led, made everything on the surface for a time a mess. But I was deeply at peace. The voice of God feels like that deep peace. Not surface peace. Not day-to-day getting by, hold steady peace, which is usually what we're trying to make and maintain. But deep in our gut, in our soul, peace. Sometimes we hear it clearly and it's so obvious, the only question is whether we have the courage to follow it. And sometimes, maybe most of the time, you learn as you go. You listen as best you can. You do what you think is right. You start. You try. You listen again. You learn. You change when you need to. And you keep listening. The voice of the Good Shepherd is not about one big decision every once in a while. It's an ongoing discipline of discernment. It's a lifetime of listening. It will often ask of us the harder thing. It will often take us places we wouldn't choose to go, face things we don't want to face. It will ask us to do the thing that if it were easy, we would have done it already and we wouldn't need the voice of God to lead us there. But the promise is that as challenging as that it is also good. Not just right or correct, it is best for us and for the world. It is a love language of God. It is a mark of the mystery of being human. A path to a life that we have never been able to find alone. Thanks be to God.